welcome to the webinar entitled Journey of the Mid-Market Merchant. I'm excited to speak with everyone today who's joining the webinar. We had a very interesting journey ourselves creating this one. I know Mark and I had a lot of fun. We hope to be able to keep this very conversational and light. If you're in the audience and you have questions about the report, anything we're saying, feel free to drop comments here. There's a way for you to add comments and we can highlight them. We're actually going to have a very special guest as part of the webinar at the end, Mr. Jason Nias, who leads North America for Shopware itself. And Shopware was the company who actually commissioned this report for RMW Commerce. Our goal is to start and continue industry conversations that are fun, interesting, and hopefully relevant to everyone in the audience here. So as we kick off, I would love, Mark, you to introduce yourself and your background, and obviously you played a key lead role on the report.
Thanks, Rick. So Mark Friedman, I've spent my career in direct-to-consumer, started out in finance, but then moved into the catalog space, a lot of retail, and for the majority of the back half here of the career, it's been very heavy digital commerce. Got my digital chop started at Brooks Brothers, and have followed suit with opportunities at Eddie Bauer, Steve Madden, and now I consult. I do a podcast called The Marketing Playbook, and this was an interesting project to do, and thank you for your guidance along the way.
Yeah, no problem. And yeah, that's definitely a podcast that everyone should check out. It's certainly on my playlist. So with that, I thought I would get started here. And one of the first things that we saw when we started looking at the mid-market e-commerce platform market overall is a few different elements. Number one is it seems like there should be more options for merchants, but it's actually fewer than you realize when you start diving into it. That's number one. Second is fewer merchants are moving than is widely believed. If you listen to other webinars and even read analyst reports about quadrants and all these things, which are great reports, it makes you feel like every merchant is always evaluating a replatform, which is certainly not what we found from the research. And I think overall, one of the things that we wanted to provide here is a few different outlets. Number one is what are the problems that merchants are running into with their current business or current platforms? How should they know they need to evaluate platforms? What should they be looking for? And then which platforms should they be looking at? I think are all important. Anything else that you thought was interesting kind of at a high level as you started to look into this research, Mark?
Marketing execs, digital folks, technologists, they're always interested in, pushing the envelope and doing a lot of new things. And certainly an e-commerce replatform is a new thing, heavy undertaking. So I think all of us kind of want to do something like this at least once in our career. That, propels people to look into it. There's a lot fewer people who are actually taking the plunge than you might think.
As we looked at the mid-market, even such a simple concept that everyone talks about is not widely understood. How do you think about what the mid-market is, Mark?
It's easy to just put a number on it. But, first of all, the generally, thought of the 10 to 250 is such a wide range because there's so many nuances. It's much more around company structure, complexity of the brand, the catalog library itself, the various channels that you're selling in. If you're digital only, maybe it's not as complex as if, you have stores and you sell wholesale and you sell on Amazon as well. And then, also the customer experience that you're looking for. If you're high fashion, you may have a very different level of need and want, than if you're, $10 items. So it's really much broader than just how big you are in dollar volume. It's all around these other pieces that contribute.
No, and that makes a lot of sense. Its segment of the market is how complex the needs. Software really has to flex within a budget. For these types of merchants, vendors that have emerged in the space that have give merchants more flexibility without providing that kind of enterprise price tag. And I think that's kind of the space that we're talking about here for the mid market.
The decision makers of whether you re-platform or not, be finance, it could be technology, it could be the digital marketer. In many cases, it's all three, and in other cases, even broader than that. As the marketer, I want everything, right? I want all the feature, I want all the function, and all the flexibility. And then, the challenge is, are you really going to be able to use all or even much of what you think you're going to? It's kind of like in Excel, I use 10 or 20% of what the Excel capabilities are.
One of the things that really struck me is how much people are not replatforming. I had an interesting kind of wild hair that I wanted to follow, and I used this report to kind of scratch that itch, as it were. And if you kind of go back to the e-commerce platform market over the last 5, 10, 15 years, there are two big players that had sort of very public either IPOs or acquisitions. And in those acquisitions, they mention a lot of big important customers that the whole world, including the tens of e-commerce platforms, all know who these important customers are. And so you would think that makes them like very big targets for this customer. If everyone is indeed replatforming all the time, you would think these other platforms would be able to attract these customers over time. And the two examples I took were really Demandware and Magento. And Demandware obviously famously IPO'd and then was acquired by Salesforce. And then Magento was acquired by eBay, sold to private equity, and then sold to Adobe again. And if you kind of look at a lot of the Demandware customers I looked at, which again, a lot of them are still on sales. I mean, and I'll challenge you in the audience, like, look, I could be wrong, but if you go to a lot of these websites, they look exactly the same as they did 10 years ago. And the same guest checkout experience, the same, search and filter. It makes it seem like, where's the innovation happening in the space? Do you notice the same thing, Mark, or am I just off my rocker here?
No, I think you're totally right. You don't get fired for for doing the replatform. It's when you botch it. And I think in the people that we spoke to, and then kind of my experiences, these projects always take a lot longer than you wanted them to. They always turn out to be more expensive than you thought they were going to be. And it's also really hard to determine whether you get a lift, right? You do this because you're either going to lower your total cost of ownership, or you're going to improve your top line because of feature and function that you now are going to have. And oftentimes it's very difficult to, compare before and after. Did your conversion rate go up simply because you made this change?
Yeah, the decision to replatform is often a bet the career decision on behalf of the chief digital officer who's making it. And in a situation where, heck, chief digital officers don't have long lives. Chief marketing officers, as you know, don't have long lives. You're there for a year or two, and then if you're spending that year or two replatforming, you're not producing necessarily results during that time because you're having to incrementally improve your current platform. And so, like, you're almost betting not only that in 3 to 5 years, you're really going to propel your growth much faster to make up for that replatform time. You're also betting that you won't screw up your SEO in the process, and you won't screw up your customer file because, the day after the replatform, what's going to happen? Your best customers are going to log in and see something different, which is, I don't know, the last time you went to a website that you loved and thought worked fine, and the company saw fit to change the interface because they thought it would be better. Were you happy the last time that happened, Mark?
Well, and no, obviously I wasn't, and I can give you a personal anecdote. You talked about career defining decisions. When I was at Steve Madden, I was president of e-commerce. Spent 7 years there, and when I started, they were already pretty far along in their e-commerce business, but they were on a homegrown .NET platform, and we felt like in order for us to grow and ultimately, kind of lean into the growth that we thought digital would have in that business, we undertook a replatforming exercise, and we wanted to use Demandware at the time. We couldn't put a deal together because we needed OMS as well, and we wound up going to something that at the time made a lot of sense. It checked all the boxes. We thought it was the right thing for us, and it turned out that it wasn't. And it put us into a situation where I think it hurt us in SEO. It didn't improve our conversion in any appreciable way. The functionality was okay, but at the end of the day, the total cost of ownership actually went up. And it was an experience that I don't want to do again.
Yeah, I think that that just about summarizes it. And so I think we kind of saw the same thing from Magento. And if you're kind of looking at, okay, how do we evaluate what's going on here? What decision do we want to make? The market has consolidated around two big names. When we were interviewing merchants, and I know you were polling friends you've been in the industry a long time, I have as well. Shopify has a lot of energy in the room. And so I know a lot of people, Shopify is on the list. And, it's almost, false to not acknowledge that narrative. And, that's something I found. I know it's you found. And, just because of their historical position and numbers of mid-market and some enterprise merchants that they have, Salesforce, even if they haven't, it's not like they've done nothing, but if you think about the number of employees that were originally Demandware employees, not many of them are around anymore at Salesforce. And so, despite that, Salesforce is the trusted brand. It's almost like the IBM of the space now, such that if you choose Salesforce, you're probably not going to get fired for it. And so as a result, there's still a safe person to choose in your consideration set. Did you find the same thing, or did you find different names, Mark?
No, I think I was a little surprised that it was as narrow. The question, all right, if you're going to consider a replatform, who do you include in the consideration set? I was surprised, and maybe it was a function of who I was asking and who's in my inner circle and all, but tried to branch out. Clearly Shopify, Salesforce, were at the top of the list, and then it was lots of one-offs or two-offs. Certainly BigCommerce and Magento get some play. You noted Commerce Tools and VTEX a bit. But it's almost when if you have a board and you're talking to them about a replatform, because Shopify has your comment air in the room, even people that are sitting on a board who may not be all that technologically savvy or digitally commerce savvy, the first thing they ask is, why aren't you going to use Shopify? So you're obligated to kick the tires, even if you are an enterprise-wide brand, so just so that you can prove to yourself and others in your business that for whatever reason they can't today support you.
No, that's right. And in addition, look, if you're leading, I've led many RFPs in my life, and I know you have as well. First step is to find your consideration set. And so if those are the first two slots, you're trying to find you can't evaluate 5 vendors. No one has time to do that. And so really you're trying to find 3 solid vendors, such that if one of them doesn't work out, you might get some ideas from the other one. So there's really 4 names that we came up with that were pretty solid, depending on the different types of options. BigCommerce, particularly at the lower end of the mid-market, seems to have come up pretty consistently in B2B scenarios, low-cost SaaS offering. Commerce Tools with the Mock Alliance has come up very much at the high end of the enterprise or upper mid-market offering with a number of merchants. In Shopware, they've been in the market for quite a long time, particularly in Germany and EMEA. And I think a lot of people in the North American market haven't heard of them. They've recently started to make some noise in the North American market. The platform has open source roots, which means that it's customizable for what you wanted to do, which for some brands is good news, bad news, because you don't want to customize it too much. You could host it yourself, or you can put it in the cloud. And so it gives you some flexibility there, and you're not tied to a particular payment provider. And then VTEX is another player that's coming from another market, entering the North American market, and is trying to get some early traction, particularly in B2B and kind of mid-market players, maybe displace some of the Salesforce accounts. Any commentary from the folks that you talked to in the interviews that you conducted, Mark, about the players?
Yeah, of the four that you note here, really the only one that got much play was BigCommerce. I was not familiar with Shopware, and most of the folks that I talked to had heard of Shopware, but didn't really know any of the differentiating factors of what they were bringing to market and how they could compete. I think the idea of headless is a term that people are kicking around and figuring out what does it mean for them, and how do they implement if they wanted to be headless. Very limited conversation around these other four players.
This is one of the challenges with mid-market space is you have a couple of players that are very well known, and then the rest of players, really their number one problem is awareness. Like, a lot of prospects don't even know who to evaluate, much less how to evaluate. One of the goals of this report is bringing forth a list of names that you should be kicking the tires on, and not everyone should evaluate the same players, but at least to know who you might think about is something that you should think of. I led a headless RFP about 2 years ago now, and at the time, this was before the CEO departed and some other things, Fabric was on the list. And I think now, the market's changed a little bit. As you look at criteria, that's something I would love to talk about next. And this goes back to your experience at Brooks Brothers, Steve Madden. You need to know when to sort of know when to hold them and know when to fold them, right, Mark? And when does the pain of staying where you are sort of cross the pain of moving? And how do you know you've reached that?
That's on, it has an e-commerce business. They have a platform provider. They all seem to hate the platform provider that they're on.
What do you mean everyone hates their provider?
Regardless of which platform I am running on, whether it's homegrown or any one of the names that we've mentioned today, when you go and you ask people, do you like the platform that you're on? Very rarely did I hear or have I experienced, we love it. It's fantastic. It's got low cost of ownership. It's feature and function rich. We've got capabilities that we haven't even tried yet. And that, it's just everything. Everybody wants better. It's as simple as that. I think that's just our nature. So this is maybe another point. People get frustrated with what they're on, and they think that the grass is greener. But in fact, every platform's got its nuances of strengths and weaknesses. And it feels to me brands that consider making a change are really not sure what is driving the pain points that they're experiencing. Is it the platform, or is it something about the business process, the people in their organization, the products that they sell? Sometimes you have to be introspective and wonder, is it the platform, or is it really yourself?
It's a great point, Mark. And I think it's a funny one, because it's not very often that a brand is going to be so introspective and honest with themselves that we have met the enemy, and
it's us.
And they are us. We're always going to throw their technology under the bus, especially if there's a new chief digital officer in. Of course, whatever choice their predecessor made was the wrong one. This decision, it's going to be the silver bullet that's going to propel us to growth. Just trust me. I mean, how many times have you heard that?
Yeah. And, that's where, having a strong technologist at the table is important. It's this, for the same reason you need a strong financial person, and, somebody that is, taking the chief digital officer to task and say, all right, if it's going to cost us X to, to redeploy, how long will it take to get a payback on that? And what kind of burn-in time is there going to be? And, you made a comment about SEO earlier. There's always a little bit of a trough, as you're making the transition. You're always going to have a little bit of that, concern that, business might take a short-term step back before you can move 2 steps ahead.
No, that makes sense. Look, I think talent is such an important part of this decision, and it's so often underappreciated because if you don't have the talent in-house, then you have to find partners to help you, because your system integrator is really the first person that can teach your team how to best use that platform. And if you find the wrong one, or that implements it improperly, you can have a really a disastrous experience with any platform. Like, I've seen really bad sites. I don't care who the provider is. And of course, the next agency or system integrator always thinks that the last one screwed it up.
From personal experience, oftentimes, let's say you have a system integrator, they're doing the tech work. There's likely going to be some integrations that are going to need to be done by your own internal tech people for other types of systems, whether it's POS or what have you. People on the digital team, they have a day job. And so many brands try to do a replatform without having project management capabilities, even if it's on a temporary basis. But that's a big mistake, and one that I made at Madden. I didn't push hard enough to have somebody come in on a project basis and basically be my eyes and ears. We tried to manage it with the team that we had, and that was a mistake.
My suspicion is that the reason that was an issue is because everyone's time is already allocated. And so how are you going to stand up a new business while you're running the existing one and not make any mistakes? The chances of that happening are pretty low. That's a big question. And now as we think about, we've decided that, our business is declining, something about our current platform is holding us back, or our partners aren't implementing it properly. We need to make a switch. In the report, we talked about a number of things that merchants should be looking at. Are there any sort of favorite questions that you have from the list that we came up with?
Because of my financial background, total cost of ownership is certainly one of the things. What is it really going to cost? And what I found is that there are these hidden costs, in the business that you may not fully understand. We talk about maybe there's a GMV, a percentage of GMV. Those are kind of the easy ones to determine. But making change, how long it takes to make change, can you get the customizations that you need, to have done? One of the things people forget to factor in is an upgrade schedule. If there's going to be upgrades coming down the pike, and how easy is it going to be to upgrade with all the customizations perhaps that you may have decided to make in your platform. I've been through experiences where a lot of those things were not easily retrofitted. So I think that's one. The other one that I find interesting, because we've talked a lot about Shopify, is this whole payments flexibility or lack thereof.
Right.
Shopify obviously brings Shop Pay. They push that very hard. And while you can bring your own, so to speak, it's my sense from talking to folks that they don't exactly make it easy if you want to bring your own. And although they claim to be agnostic, and a lot of the other platforms are agnostic, it's a little bit more complicated. So you need to understand, what's important for your business there.
Right. And then kind of what you're locking yourself into, depending on what platform decision you're making. You brought something there about customizations, and I think that matches my experience as well. Is a question that I really love asking is like, okay, vendor, agency, partner, let's say we launch with features X, Y, Z, and now I want to add features 1, 2, 3. Who can make this change? Can I configure to make this change? Can I install an app to make this change? Do I need to hire a developer to make this change? what's the cost of that? And outlining a roadmap like, okay, we're in the US and the UK. If next year we want to go to the Nordics and have a native site for the Nordics, walk me through how that happens. Do we need to skin the site? Is that going to require a testing from our agency partner? Or can we just push it live? Do we need a new payment processor? All the decisions that go with this, I think are often overlooked. And I think you mentioned when you're at Madden, how sometimes the magnitude of costs really surprises you when you actually start to outline, oh, because this feature isn't in the platform, I'm going to have to hire a vendor to do this, which is not in my budget.
As we've talked about, and we mentioned this in the report, if I'm selling widgets, I don't want to be a technology. I shouldn't want to be a technology provider too. But look, let's face it. When I got started in the web 20 years ago or more, that was the hand we were dealt. I was at Brooks Brothers. We needed to become technology savvy. It wasn't as easy as just going to, buy Shopify or something like that. I think that with the advent of the tech that we have now, the brands that are selling, can be more focused on the product and the creative that they're bringing to market. You certainly have to understand the technology, but not quite the same way, that you did before, because in fact, those costs, can creep up. And just one more point on that, it goes back to what we were talking about before, about when you're doing the RFP. Sometimes having somebody help you do the RFP is really important because, I like to use this phrase with folks that I work with, my best clients are the ones that tell me we don't know what we don't know. And, until you can have somebody prod you for, well, do you want to do international or don't you want to do international, or what flavor of international, like you were saying, it's really helpful to get that assistance.
Yeah, no, I think that makes a lot of sense. Replatforming, it's important, but it's also important that you be prepared. And we're trying to help merchants be prepared for what's going on so that they can have an easier time in making a decision. So I really appreciate the time here, Mark. I would like to bring on actually one of the sponsors of the report from Shopware. Again, this research was commissioned, and so we're really happy to have been partnered with Jason Nias on the engagement, who I just actually added here. So he's actually in New York City, although we're in different places in New York City. I think we're all, although I think, Mark, you might be in Jersey. But welcome, Jason.
Thank you very much. Great job. And it is really hard to sit quiet and not be able to add to the conversation. So I'm thrilled to be here now.
Why don't you give a little bit of your background, Jason? How did you end up at Shopware?
Hi, Jason Nias, General Manager at Shopware North America. I've been in e-commerce for 24 years, and the majority of that was spent at a company called Digital River. And we were actually a leader in the Gartner Magic Quadrant in 2016 and 17. SAP acquired Hybris, Salesforce acquired Demandware, Adobe acquired Magento, and in the leader quadrant so now it's IBM, Oracle, Adobe, SAP, you get and Digital River.
Yeah, all the big boys.
And so we were like, oh no, commerce is going to grow up. And on that same report, you see little Shopify and BigCommerce in the left, which is the niche category. It's really interesting to see how commerce, if you look back a little bit, it will really help you look forward as to who's going to have staying power in the future ones. And so it was at that point where Digital River pivoted and we became an app inside of BigCommerce, Salesforce, Adobe, all these players. And so I got to know their products, their services. And it was through that experience that I really realized that the innovation had started to stop and slow in commerce, but the price continued to rise. And so Shopware approached me, and I at first thought the world doesn't need another commerce platform. But over time, I realized that what the market really needed was bringing back feature innovation and finding ways to reduce costs for merchants. and not continue to increase them. So longest intro ever, but thanks, Rick, for asking me the
Love
question.
Love it, Jason. I appreciate it. Look, we had kind of a controversial thought at the beginning of this white paper, which is that like mid-market is forgotten. What does that mean to you, Jason?
You know, in any business, you know, you've got a Walmart and a Target and very few companies in between. And the same thing is true in commerce. You have people building for the masses. And I think Shopify is the greatest box ever invented for commerce. And if you fit in that box, you should buy from them. On the other end, you've got the Mock Alliance and Commerce Tools as an example. And they're building for the megas. And so what happens when you have that dynamic is you have people building services and service levels that are built for the poles. But the reality of it is, you know, 50% by our estimates of the commerce market doesn't really fit into either of those. They either have to reduce their requirements and fit in the box, or they have to overpay for something that they really shouldn't or can't afford. And so the mid-market to us is really that enterprise expectations, but the budget of an SMB.
Right. Yeah. Champagne tastes on a beer budget.
Yeah, exactly. Well, German company, the beer budget, that works for us.
There you go. Yeah, Oktoberfest. We got a question coming in, and I will actually talk about that here. Let me see if I can get everyone on the screen at the same time. This is good. Dana has a question, and I think this is something that you highlighted in the report, Mark. And so I'll kick it to you first, but then I think Jason has his own thoughts. What are people doing instead of replatforming? Because if they're not replatforming, they're trying to keep their jobs, and they want to improve the business, but they just don't feel like replatforming has the ROI relative to some of the other investments that they could be making. What else are brands doing?
Yeah, I think it's similar to what, you know, Dana's calling out here is, you know, what other feature and function can I add? So AI is obviously, you know, such a big buzzword, but so many of the feature and functions that you have on your site today have really been powered by AI for an extended period, not just, you know, 6 months or 12 months ago. But, you know, I think the capabilities around personalization, so better targeting, you know, products and promotion to customers that, you know, and even in some cases, you know, folks that you don't, there's big opportunities there. I think the analytics capabilities and how you actually manage customers through various journeys, you know, this whole concept of customer movement that you hear a lot about now. How do I get, you know, the new customers that I acquired that are coming back to the site? How do I get them to make their second purchase or their third purchase? You know, there's so many dollars that are spent on customer acquisition. And in some businesses, so little brain cells of how to get that customer to make their second purchase. And we all know that making that second purchase is a lot easier than getting that first time. So a lot of this feature and function for those reasons are important and maybe a better play than just fully replatforming.
How do you see this question, Jason?
Well, I first assume that Dana works for Contentful. That's the first way I see it. Contentful is a great company, partner of ours. I think I have a couple of angles on it. The first one is, you know, with the changing in the economic environment in the world, a lot of companies looked at how to make do with what they have, as opposed to kind of biting the bullet and doing the big replatforming. That's just the truth. 2023 was not a huge year in terms of replatforming. Some won, some lost. We did fine. But a lot of people said, how do I make what I have suck less? And I'll kick the can down the road on doing the big overhaul later. And there's a lot of people running on commerce platforms that are no longer supported in the industry. They're literally end of life, but they're hiring tools like web content management systems because they've moved the commerce solution to a headless one, which is a great example of trying to make your pain less because you're going to solve the problem with a Contentful as an example. Another example is, you know, on Magento in their ecosystem, it's a lot of Whova and Bold to kind of make some of the pain they're feeling around, you know, the product be less painful.
The themes or the checkout, you know, something like that.
Yep. And they'll conquer the big bite another day. And we saw a lot of that. And by the way, in our world, Q1 is like 3 to 4 times what it was last year in terms of people having interest. Because in 2023, they did a lot of the kicking of the tires and kicking it down the road. In 2024, I think it looks like they're going to really start to address some of that real acute pain.
Yeah, no, I think that's interesting. And it sounds like it's good news for SaaS vendors as well. If 2024 is going to look a little bit rosier than 2023, pocketbooks are hopefully opening up. Consumers aren't quite as worried as they were last year about a recession. And I think that means merchants are a little bit more aggressive. We're happy to see that trend. Anything else from a pain point of view? Like, what do you find, Jason, as there are a lot of like small things that merchants complain about? And Mark said that everyone hates their platform, which is, I think, kind of a funny anecdote to think about, but it's never like, oh, I'm leaving for 10 reasons. There's always one reason, really.
Yep.
And then there's like 9 things they say to justify what they did. What do you think is the one reason that really is the true motivation for a replatform?
Ooh, that is such a great question. We have a lot of single issue voters as it relates to commerce platforms. I wish I could give you one answer. I'm going to give you a few that we see the most. Recently, when Shopify announced their price hike, it destabilized a lot of their base of people doing meaningful GMV. And so I think that's one thing that says, hey, listen, there has to be a way to do this cheaper. At least this is the moment to evaluate. Whether they change or not, your guess is as good as mine. But there's a whole bunch of people thinking cost now can be a big driver.
Okay.
The second one, and it's kind of related, but if you were to track how much a percentage of GMV commerce platforms get over time, it actually has been going down, even though the cost of commerce has been going up in aggregate. Mm-hmm. And so what's happened is the shifting of economics to forcing merchants to use the payment provider we want because of the models that are supported behind the scenes. And so a lot of the costs of commerce are really connected to vendor lock-ins on your email vendor and all those things. And so preventing choice has been a big reason that people are investigating alternatives. And the third is they're on unsupported platforms. I mean, think back to the 2016 story I told you. IBM, they outsourced it they sold it to HCL, who's a services-based company for the most part. And you have Oracle, who's end of life their commerce platform. You have Magento. If you're less than 50 million, you're not supported. So there's a whole bunch of people running on something that has already been killed. Sorry, I couldn't find a better word. No,
that's interesting. And I think, Mark, you have firsthand experience with this. What's your trigger issue from a replatform point of view as you think about and assess a company you work with or you have been at in the past?
Yeah, I think the points that Jason made are all good ones. I think the other one, and maybe it's a subset of end of life, is that if you are on a platform and you've been on for a long time and you have been active in making customizations, you create ultimately this Frankenstein of code that's out there. You may have a base foundation that was very solid, but then you built on top of it, on top of it, on top of it, and after a while, it no longer looks like what you originally had. And that's something. Every time we would want to make a change, and the tech guys come in and say, "Yeah, we made the change, but we broke 12 other things along the way."
Right.
That increases the cost of ownership. It increases frustration. So I think that's a big reason for considering alternatives as well.
Yeah.
No, and I think that makes a lot of sense. I find there are two things more than anything that cause people to think about replatforms. Number one is like some kind of major investor event. Like there's a new CEO, the company is recapitalized, and they start to look at, there's new thinking that comes in. And I think that kind of lines up with the idea that, look, if you're just trying to hit your number next year, you don't have time to replatform. You have time to add a new marketing program, increase your spend, optimize your spend, go on a new channel, improve this workflow, get products to customers faster. You have motivation to do the incremental things. It's extremely rare. I find, particularly in like private equity or public companies, you almost have to have new money and new talent to take a risk on a big new decision like a replatform. And if you're not in that situation, I find that you have a lot of tire kickers that aren't actually going to replatform. They like seeing new things and talking to vendors, and vendors get very excited to talk to them. But these people aren't really in their pipeline. Like, if you're going to be honest with them, what they're trying to do is actually make sure that their current vendor, they can get leverage against their current vendor. Like, hey, so-and-so did this. Have you thought about this idea? And try to get it on their current vendor's roadmap. I mean, that might be against you, Jason. I don't know, but
no, but it's a true statement. We saw a ton of that in 2023, which is show me what's out there. Oh man, that's really cool. And then, oh, I need a better deal for my current provider or these features or whatever. So I totally agree. We use a term internally called return on aggravation. Like if they're going to actually do this, it has to be worth their aggravation of doing a replatform, because it's not a small undertaking.
No, for sure. And I think Marshall, who's an old friend here, it's totally right. It sounds like in 2023, a lot of people were like this. They kind of get in turtle mode. If you do something too outside of the norm, then there's almost only downside, because if you're risky and it pays off in the future, you may not even be around to see the results. But if the launch fails, then you're going to be fired like very soon. So the risk reward ratio is like almost inverted here. And so I think people miss a lot of opportunities this way. Look, I appreciate the time here. It's been about 45 minutes, which is all I promised you all here. This has been a lot of fun. I know Mark and I both enjoyed working with you and the team, Jason, talking to some of your merchants. And I know Mark and I enjoyed reaching back into our own networks. Do you have any parting thoughts, either of you?
Mark, you want to go first?
Interesting opportunity to kick the tires on what's going on in the market. I would like to say that there were aha moments, but I'm not sure there were aha moments. I think that, there's definitely intrigue about what's out there to help people do their jobs better. I think that's a good way of kind of, shrouding this. And whether it's replatforming or, more modular, kinds of things, I think people do have an open mind. And, I one other, point, and this maybe is more Jason, you're saying that, things are opening up. I'm a little worried with all the headcount reductions that we're seeing, in these various companies and in brands, whether or not some of these initiatives are going to get further kicked down into the future, because there's not going to be headcount to support the change.
It is a big driver. Like, hey, these 5 people that used to do all these things aren't here anymore. I need to find a more efficient solution or a way to do it. And so in a way it could cripple change, but in a way it could accelerate it. So it kind of depends on the company. So my last words, Rick, if you don't mind, is, we went down this journey around how do we do something unique as being Shopware and start a new conversation. And one of the thoughts we had is we would do what everybody else does and create these total economic impact studies that are incredibly biased, that result in basically stories that come out and say how great we are and how much cheaper we are to run, that everybody else does. And we decided that's not the right approach. We wanted to have an honest conversation around who we think is the flyover states of e-commerce, the forgotten middle market. And so that's why we went into this journey with you guys, and we are so appreciative of the work and the output and you guys at RMW. So thank you.
All right. Well, I appreciate the time, Jason. And again, thank you all for tuning in. We're going to have a lot more commerce platform related content here. If you haven't been around, check out the RMW Commerce YouTube channel. That's where a lot of it's going to be. Of course, if you follow us on LinkedIn, either Mark and I or I, definitely do that. And I would encourage you to check out and kick the tires on Jason and Shopware as well. So I appreciate everyone talking today, and look forward to the next time we get together.
Thanks, Rick. Good to see you.
Thanks a lot.